This story is about how I escaped my debt-ridden life, but that escape came with a set of unbreakable rules. I was at the absolute bottom, with bills piling up so high I couldn't see a way out. My small business had failed, and my mom's medical bills had finished the job. It felt like I was drowning in an ocean of red ink. So when I saw a strange ad online promising a life without debt, a life without chains, I clicked it. I had nothing left to lose. What I didn't know was that some deals are worse than any debt, and some chains are meant to be broken, not replaced. The walls of my tiny apartment felt like they were closing in. Every surface was covered with a thin layer of dust and a thick layer of shame. White and pink envelopes were scattered on the kitchen counter, each one a paper cut to my soul. Eviction notice, final warning, immediate payment required. They were a constant, silent scream. My phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with a picture of my sister Chloe. Her smile was bright and genuine, a painful reminder of a time when I could smile back without it feeling like a lie. I let it go to voicemail. What could I possibly say to her? That I was a failure? That the money she loaned me last month was already gone? The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't face her, not like this. The calls from numbers I didn't recognize were easier to ignore. I knew who they were, the collectors. Their voices were always the same, a cold, polite tone that did nothing to hide the threat underneath. They were just doing their job, but it felt like they were vultures, circling, waiting for me to finally collapse. The final straw came in the afternoon mail. It wasn't a friendly letter. It was a legal document, heavy with important words, taped to my front door. It said I had 72 hours, 3 days. Then my key would no longer work. I would be out on the street. Panic, cold and sharp, stabbed through the thick fog of my depression. I sank onto my lumpy couch, the springs groaning in protest. My laptop was open on the coffee table, its screen a bright rectangle in the dim room. I scrolled mindlessly through news articles and cat videos, anything to distract myself from the ticking clock. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't a normal ad with flashy colors or a catchy jingle. It was just a few lines of simple black text against a white background. It seemed to know me. It said, "A life without debt is a life without chains. We can break them for you." It felt like a fever dream, something my desperate mind had cooked up. But it was there. Below the text was a single button that said, "Learn more." My hand trembled as I moved the cursor over it. What was this? Some kind of scam? Probably. But what did I have to lose? My dignity was already gone. My money was a negative number. My apartment was about to be taken away. With a hollow feeling in my gut, a mix of foolishness and a tiny, stupid spark of hope, I clicked. A new page loaded. It was even simpler. It just asked for my name. No address, no social security number, no bank details, just my name, Alex Miller, and a box to check. I accept the terms of a new life. I didn't even read the terms. There was no link to click. It was just a statement. I typed my name, I checked the box, I clicked accept. The page vanished, returning me to the news feed I was scrolling before. Nothing happened. No confirmation email, no pop-up window, nothing. I felt a wave of foolishness wash over me. Of course, it was nothing, just a weird pop-up. The last bit of hope sputtered out, leaving only the cold ash of my reality. I closed the laptop, the weight of the last few months finally crushing me. I didn't bother to change clothes or even turn off the light. I just curled up on the couch and fell into a deep, dreamless, and exhausted sleep. I woke up with a crick in my neck, the morning sun slanting through the dusty blinds. The first thought that hit me was the same one that hit me every morning, dread. The 72-hour clock was ticking. I had to pack. I had to call Chloe. I had to do something. I pushed myself up, my body aching, and shuffled to the kitchen to make a pot of bitter, cheap coffee. I grabbed my phone from the counter to check the time and saw a flood of new emails. Usually my inbox was just a collection of spam and more payment reminders. But these were different. The subject lines made my heart stop. Payment confirmation. Your account is settled. A gift from an anonymous benefactor. My hands started to shake. This had to be a mistake. A cruel joke. I clicked on the first email. It was from my largest creditor, the one whose calls I dreaded the most. It was a simple, automated message. Dear Alex Miller, we are pleased to inform you that your outstanding balance of $42,112 has been paid in full. Your account is now closed. We wish you the best in your future financial endeavors. I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. They didn't make sense. I quickly opened the next one, and the next. It was the same story. My student loans, paid. The hospital bills for my mom, paid. My maxed out credit cards, all at a zero balance. The world started to tilt. I stumbled back to my laptop, my fingers fumbling on the keyboard as I logged into my online banking portal. The page loaded, and I braced myself for the familiar, horrifyingly large negative number. But it was gone. In its place was a simple, beautiful, impossible 0. A little further down, I saw my credit score. It had been destroyed, a number so low it was laughable. Now it was pristine, perfect. It was as if the last 5 years of struggle had been completely wiped away. The relief was a physical force. It hit me like a wave, knocking the air out of my lungs. A sob escaped my throat, a raw, ragged sound I hadn't made since I was a child. I sank to the floor and wept. Tears of disbelief, of gratitude, of a freedom so total it felt like I could fly. It was a miracle, a real, actual miracle. Later that morning, after I had pulled myself together, there was a knock at the door. Not the loud, demanding knock of a landlord, but a soft, polite tap. I opened it to find a courier, a man in a sleek, all-black uniform, holding a matching black box. He didn't say a word, just had me sign a digital pad, and then he was gone. The box was heavy, cool to the touch. It felt expensive, completely out of place in my dingy hallway. I brought it inside and set it on the coffee table. There was no sender's address. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was not money, not a check, not even a letter of explanation. It was a heavy, leather-bound binder. The leather was black and smooth, and on the cover, embossed in simple, elegant silver letters, were the words, "Your New Life." I opened it. The inside cover was blank, except for a single old-fashioned-looking key taped to the thick paper. It was a skeleton key made of dark, heavy metal. I had no idea what it was for. My miracle, it seemed, came with a mystery. And I had a sinking feeling, a tiny chill that ran down my spine, that there was a catch somewhere. There had to be. The leather of the binder felt strange in my hands, both ancient and brand new. The smell was rich, like an old library. I ran my fingers over the silver words, "Your New Life," before turning to the first page. The paper was thick, creamy, and expensive. The text on it was not handwritten. It looked like it had been typed on an old-fashioned typewriter, the letters sharp and black against the page. It wasn't a welcome letter or an explanation. It was a list of rules. They were presented without any context, just simple, numbered statements that were both plain and deeply weird. My eyes scanned the page. 1. All doors and windows must be locked by 10 p.m. No exceptions. That seems simple enough. Just good security sense, really. 2. One light must remain on in the house between sunset and sunrise. A little strange, maybe, but not difficult. A night light would do the trick. 3. Do not acknowledge figures or movement in your peripheral vision. My blood went a little cold at that one. What did that even mean? What figures? I glanced nervously into the corners of my dim apartment. It felt like a line from a ghost story. 4. Never answer the landline if it rings more than twice. I didn't even have a landline. Did that mean I was supposed to get one? The instruction was so specific, so bizarre. 5. Any broken item must be replaced with an identical one within 24 hours. This was the most confusing of all. Any broken item? A plate? A shoelace? A pencil? How could I possibly find an identical replacement for everything? It seemed impossible. I turned the page expecting more rules, more explanations. But the rest of the pages in the thick binder were completely, utterly blank. Hundreds of empty pages, waiting. For what? It felt like an elaborate, creepy prank. A very, very expensive prank. But then I thought about my bank account. The zero balance. The paid-off debts. The clean slate. That wasn't a prank. That was real. The relief was real. The freedom was real. I looked from the binder back to the eviction notice, still taped to my door. This binder, these weird rules, were somehow connected to my salvation. Maybe it was some eccentric billionaire's strange social experiment. Maybe it was part of some psychological study I had accidentally signed up for. Whatever the reason, I was out of debt. I was free. If all I had to do in return was follow a few strange, harmless rules, then it was the best deal of my life. What was the harm? Locking my doors at a certain time, keeping a light on, ignoring a trick of the eye. It was a small price to pay for a second chance at life. I decided then and there to play along. I would follow the rules, all of them. After all, it was just a few strange habits in exchange for total freedom. I tossed the binder onto the couch, feeling a strange mix of unease and giddy relief. I had a new life to start, and I wasn't going to let a creepy book get in the way of it. The key from the binder fit the lock of a small but clean apartment in a quiet part of the city. It was a massive upgrade from my old place. The windows were clean, the walls were freshly painted, and there were no threatening letters taped to the door. Weeks turned into a month, and my new life began to feel real. The transformation was incredible. I found a stable, low-stress job at a local bookstore. The pay wasn't amazing, but it didn't need to be. I had no debts to pay. For the first time since I was a teenager, I could breathe. The constant, crushing weight on my chest was gone. I bought new clothes. I ate good food. I even started sleeping through the night again. But underneath it all, there was a low hum of anxiety, a constant awareness of the rules. They became a part of my daily routine. Every night, a few minutes before 10 p.m., I would walk through the apartment, checking the lock on the door, securing the latches on the two windows. Then, I would turn on the small lamp in the corner of the living room, its soft glow pushing back the shadows. I followed the rules diligently, never questioning them. It was a small price for this peace. The rule about the peripheral figures was the strangest. A few times I thought I saw something, a flicker of movement just at the edge of my vision. A tall, dark shape that was gone the moment I tried to look directly at it. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, a symptom of the low-level stress the rules created. I forced myself to ignore it, to not turn my head just as the rule instructed. One Tuesday night about a month into my new life, the first real test came. I was reading on the couch, the corner lamp casting its warm light, when the world suddenly went black. Not just dim, but a complete and total darkness, a citywide power outage. My heart hammered against my ribs. Rule number 2. One light must remain on between sunset and sunrise. The rule was broken. The darkness in the room felt thick, heavy, and absolute. It was more than just the absence of light. It felt like a presence. I fumbled for my phone on the coffee table, my hands shaking so badly I almost knocked it to the floor. I just needed a flashlight. I had to get a light on. The silence of the apartment was deafening. Every tiny creak of the building sounded like a footstep. The feeling of being watched, the one I usually kept at bay by ignoring the corners of my eyes, was now overwhelming. It felt like something was in the room with me, standing in the suffocating darkness, and the only thing that had been holding it back was that one single lamp. My fingers finally found my phone. I swiped at the screen, trying to find the flashlight icon. Just as my thumb found it, the lamp in the corner flickered back to life. The power was back on. The entire outage had lasted maybe a minute, 60 seconds at most, but it had felt like an eternity. I sat there, breathing heavily, my body drenched in a cold sweat. A profound, unexplainable dread washed over me. It felt like I had just stood on a train track and the train had missed me by an inch. I had narrowly, accidentally, avoided some kind of catastrophe. I tried to laugh it off, but the fear lingered. The next morning, as the sun streamed in, I tried to forget the incident. But as I was getting ready for work, I noticed something. On the wall next to the door was a framed photograph. It was a picture of me and Chloe, taken on our last family vacation a few years ago. We were smiling, arms around each other, the ocean behind us. The frame was crooked. It was just slightly askew, tilted to the left. I knew I hadn't touched it. I was meticulous about things like that. Did I knock it in my panic last night, or did something else, something in the darkness, move it? A few days after the power outage, the unsettling feeling still lingered like a bad taste in my mouth. I tried to push it away, to focus on the good things in my new life. It was a Saturday morning, and I was making coffee, enjoying the simple pleasure of not having to rush off to a job I hated. I reached for my favorite coffee mug. It was a big, heavy ceramic mug, a cheerful blue color. Chloe had given it to me for my birthday a couple of years ago. It had a stupid cartoon owl on it and said, "Who needs coffee?" It was dorky, but it made me smile. As I pulled it from the cabinet, my fingers slipped. The mug fell, not far, just a few inches onto the granite countertop. It didn't shatter, but a loud crack echoed through the quiet kitchen. I picked it up. A long, thin fracture ran right through the owl's face. I sighed in annoyance. It was just a mug, but it was my favorite. Then, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Rule number 5. Any broken item must be replaced with an identical one within 24 hours. My annoyance quickly turned to frustration. This was ridiculous. It was a cheap novelty mug from a gift shop. Finding an exact duplicate would be a nightmare. Still, the memory of the deep, oppressive darkness during the power outage was fresh in my mind. The feeling of a near miss. I couldn't risk it. I spent the entire afternoon online, my frustration growing with every search. I typed in, "Blue owl mug. Who needs coffee mug? Gift shop ceramic owl mug." I scrolled through thousands of images of mugs, but none of them were the right one. The shade of blue was wrong, the owl's design was different, the font was not the same. It had to be identical. Finally, after hours of searching, I found it. It was on some obscure website that sold leftover gift shop inventory. My relief was short-lived when I saw the shipping information. It wouldn't arrive for 2, maybe 3 business days. That was well outside the 24-hour window. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the cracked mug on my desk. This was insane. I was letting a stupid rule dictate my weekend. It was just a coffee mug. What was the worst that could happen? The system pays off my debt but then punishes me over a $10 piece of ceramic. It made no sense. I made a decision. I was not going to let this paranoia rule me. I closed the laptop. I would just throw the mug away and forget about it. The rule was stupid, and I wasn't going to follow it. I slept peacefully that night, proud of my small act of defiance. The next morning, I woke up, stretched, and went to the kitchen. I decided I'd make a pot of tea instead of coffee. I reached into the cabinet for a different mug, and my eyes fell on the spot where I'd left the cracked blue one. It was gone. I hadn't thrown it out yet. I was sure of it. I had left it right there on the counter. I felt a chill creep up my spine. I searched the kitchen, the trash can, the dishwasher. It was nowhere. It had simply vanished. A little later, I was on the phone with Chloe, just catching up. I tried to keep my voice light, to sound like the happy, well-adjusted brother she thought I was becoming. To make conversation, I said, "You know, the funniest thing happened. I broke that silly owl mug you gave me for my birthday." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Chloe's voice, full of confusion. "A mug? I didn't give you a mug, Alex. I got you that navy blue sweater, remember? You wore it at Christmas." I froze, the phone feeling like a block of ice against my ear. The sweater. I remembered the sweater, but I also remembered the mug. I had both memories. "No," I said slowly. "It was definitely a mug. Big blue one with an owl." "Alex, are you feeling okay?" she asked, her voice now laced with concern. "I've never bought you a mug in my life." I remember looking at them but decided on the sweater. I ended the call quickly, my heart pounding. I stumbled to my closet and flung the door open. There, hanging neatly on a hanger, was a navy blue sweater I hadn't seen in months. The mug, the gift, Chloe's memory of giving it to me, it had all been erased, plucked out of existence. It wasn't just my life the rules controlled. It was reality itself. And I had just learned how deep that control really went. The vanishing mug was not a warning. It was a statement. The invisible force behind my new life was not just watching, it was editing. It could reach into the past and snip out inconvenient threads, reweaving the fabric of reality and memory without leaving a single seam. The fear this created was a new kind, a cold intellectual terror that settled deep in my bones. My life, which had felt like a gift, now revealed itself to be a meticulously crafted cage. The bars were invisible, but I could feel them pressing in on all sides. My diligence with the rules became a full-blown obsession. I no longer just checked the locks at night. I checked them 3 or 4 times, pulling on the doorknob until my knuckles were white. I bought a box of spare light bulbs and kept them in every room, just in case. I bought a backup battery-powered lamp and kept it on my bedside table, a silent guard against the darkness. The most difficult rule to follow was number 3. Do not acknowledge figures or movement in your peripheral vision. Before, the flickers of movement were rare and easy to dismiss. Now, they were constant. Every time I sat down to read, or worked at my desk, or even just walked through my apartment, they were there. Tall, slender shadows that lingered just at the edge of my sight. They didn't have faces or clear features, just long limbs and a stillness that was deeply unnatural. They looked like stretched-out human silhouettes, ink stains against the air. The urge to whip my head around, to confront them, to prove they were real or just a trick of the light was almost unbearable. But I remembered the lesson of the mug. A small act of defiance had a permanent, terrifying consequence. So what would happen if I broke this rule? I forced myself to keep my eyes forward. I would feel a presence to my left, and I would focus intently on the book in my hands. I would sense a tall shape standing in the doorway behind me, and I would stare at my computer screen until my eyes burned. It was a constant battle of wills, and it was shredding my nerves. My sanity felt like a rope fraying one strand at a time. The relief of being debt-free was a distant memory, replaced by the constant gnawing anxiety of my gilded prison. I was a specimen in a jar, and something was watching me, testing me, feeding on my perfect compliance. My new life was no longer a blessing. It was a curse with better furniture. The quiet hum of my controlled existence was shattered one Tuesday morning. I had a routine. Wake up, make coffee, check the locks from the night before, and then, with a sense of dread, open the binder. I never knew why I did it. The pages were always blank. It was a compulsion, a need to look into the face of my silent warden. I would open it, see the same 5 rules on the first pages, see the endless blank sheets that followed, and then close it, feeling a small measure of relief that nothing had changed. But this morning was different. I opened the binder, and my breath caught in my throat. There, on the first blank page after the original 5 rules, was a new line of text. It was page 7 of the binder. It had been smooth and empty yesterday. I was sure of it. Now it held a single sentence, typed in the same crisp, unnerving font as the others. Rule number 6 had appeared overnight. It said, "Do not refuse any gift left at your door." My mind raced. The rules could change. They could be added to. This wasn't a static agreement. It was a living document. The entity, the system, whatever it was, could alter the terms of my life whenever it wanted. The feeling of being trapped intensified tenfold. I wasn't just in a cage. I was in a cage whose walls could shrink at any moment. The new rule terrified me. What kind of gifts? From who? The lack of information was the worst part. The rule hung in the air, a new, unknown variable in the complex equation of my survival. I didn't have to wait long to find out. That afternoon, as I was leaving for work, I saw it. Sitting perfectly centered on my doormat was a small, plain brown box. There was no shipping label, no postage, no writing on it at all. It was just there. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it. The first test of the new rule. Do not refuse any gift. Did that mean I had to bring it inside? That seemed to be the implication. I could just leave it there, but that felt like a refusal. I could throw it away, but that was also a refusal. My hands trembled as I bent down and picked it up. It was light, and I could hear something shifting inside. I took a deep breath, unlocked my door, and brought the box into my apartment, placing it on the kitchen table. I had accepted it. I had followed the rule. But now a new question tormented me. What was I supposed to do with it? I carefully opened the box. Inside, resting on a small piece of cotton, was a tarnished silver locket. It was old, the silver darkened with age, and it had a delicate floral pattern etched onto its surface. It was the kind of thing you might find in an antique store. It was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. I had no choice but to keep it. I placed the locket on my dresser, where it sat, cold and foreign, a new piece of my prison's decor. Chloe's visits had become less frequent. I made excuses, telling her I was busy with my new job, but the truth was, I was afraid. I was afraid she would notice how much I had changed. I was afraid I would slip up and say something about the rules, about the shadows, about the constant, crushing fear. But eventually, I ran out of excuses. She showed up at my door one Saturday, a bag of groceries in her hand and a worried look on her face. I was in the neighborhood, she said, a line I knew was a lie. She was here to check on me. Her presence immediately threw my carefully constructed world into chaos. As she bustled around the kitchen, putting away the food, I felt a rising panic. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon. Soon it would be sunset. Soon I would need to turn on the lamp. Soon it would be 10 p.m. and I would need to lock the doors. These rituals, performed alone, were already stressful. With her here, watching me, they would seem like the actions of a madman. "You seem tense, Alex," she said, her back to me as she put a carton of milk in the fridge. "Is everything okay at work?" I mumbled a response about being tired. We made small talk, but I could feel her eyes on me, studying me. The sun finally set, and the room began to fill with long shadows. My anxiety spiked. Rule number 2. One light must remain on. "I'm just going to turn this on," I said, my voice a little too loud as I walked over to the corner lamp and flicked the switch. The room was flooded with its soft amber glow. Chloe gave me a strange look. "It's not even dark yet," she commented. I just shrugged. A few hours later, as she was getting ready to leave, my phone alarm went off. It was 9:55 p.m. Time to check the locks. I stood up and walked to the front door, methodically turning the deadbolt and sliding the chain into place. Then I went to the windows, making sure each latch was secure. When I turned around, Chloe was staring at me, her arms crossed. Her expression was no longer just worried, it was fearful. "Alex, what is going on with you?" she asked, her voice soft. "The lamp, the locks. You're acting so strange. You're not sleeping. You look like you haven't had a good meal in weeks." I had to tell her. I couldn't bear the isolation anymore. My voice shaking, I tried to explain. I told her about the debt, the online form, the binder. The words sounded insane as they left my mouth. A magical benefactor? Rules about peripheral vision? A coffee mug that erased itself from her memory? I saw the understanding in her eyes change from confusion to pity. She thought I was losing my mind. "Let me see it," she said. "This binder." I hesitated, then retrieved it from my bedroom. I handed it to her. She opened it, her fingers tracing the typewritten rules. She looked at me, her eyes full of a deep, painful sadness. "Oh, Alex," she whispered, "this is a symptom." "The stress of the debt, it must have caused some kind of a break. This isn't real. You've created this whole thing in your head to cope with the trauma." The argument that followed was quiet but brutal. I insisted it was real. She insisted I needed help. Every word I said to defend my sanity only made me sound more unhinged. She saw the binder not as a source of rules, but as a sign of a deep psychological wound. She left soon after, promising to call a doctor for me. As the door clicked shut behind her, a wave of total crushing isolation washed over me. She didn't believe me. No one would ever believe me. I was completely alone in my prison. And for the first time, a terrifying new question entered my mind. What if she was right? What if I really was going crazy? The landline sat on a small table in the corner, silent and black. I had bought it and had it installed the week after I moved in, a reluctant act of obedience to rule number 4. It had never rung, not once, until tonight. 2 days after Chloe's visit, as I sat stewing in my own fear and self-doubt, the phone let out a shrill, piercing ring. My entire body went rigid. The sound was alien in the quiet apartment. It rang a second time. My heart hammered in my chest. Never answer the landline if it rings more than twice. The third ring started. I clamped my hands over my ears, my eyes squeezed shut. What would happen if I answered? Would a voice speak? Would it be the benefactor? Would it offer answers, or just a new kind of damnation? The ring cut off abruptly, plunging the room back into a heavy silence. I sat there for a long time, shaking. The temptation to have picked it up, to have screamed into the receiver for answers, was immense. But I was a coward. I was a prisoner, and I obeyed my jailer. The feeling of helplessness was suffocating. I couldn't go on like this, living in ignorance and fear. Chloe thought I was crazy, and part of me was starting to agree with her. I needed proof. I needed answers. I turned to the only place I could think of, the internet. I spent hours searching for anything related to my situation. Debts paid by anonymous benefactor. Life contract with strange rules. The binder. The search results were a wasteland of conspiracy theories, financial scams, and articles about eccentric millionaires. Nothing matched my experience. It was all a dead end, which only made Chloe's theory seem more plausible. I was about to give up when I tried a different approach. I typed in some of the specific, strange phrases from the rules. Figures in peripheral vision. Gifts left at door. The search results were different this time. Buried deep on the 5th page of results was a link to a forum. It was an old-school message board, the kind from the early days of the internet, with a simple, text-based interface. The name of the forum was encrypted, just a string of random numbers and letters. The description was simple, a support group for those with unique arrangements. My heart started to pound again. I clicked the link. The posts were cryptic, written in a kind of code. But it was a code I instantly understood. Users talked about the terms of their agreements. They mentioned breaches and the consequences. They complained about new amendments appearing on blank pages. And then I saw it. A post from a user named E77 that made my blood run cold. It said, "Received my first amendment today." Page 7. Have to accept packages now. Anyone else? It was my exact situation. I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. There were others. Scrolling through the threads, I found what I was looking for. A user was explaining to a newcomer how to find others in the program. It wasn't an address. It was a digital breadcrumb trail, a series of hidden links and coded messages that, if followed correctly, would lead to another participant. It was risky. It felt like breaking a different kind of rule, but I was desperate. There were allies out there, people who would believe me. I had to find them. The digital trail was a rabbit hole of encrypted websites and password-protected chat rooms. It took me 2 full days of obsessive clicking and code breaking, following a path that felt designed to be confusing. The final clue was not a location, but a photograph. It was an image of a specific, oddly shaped crack in a sidewalk, next to a fire hydrant painted a faded yellow. Below it were GPS coordinates. I drove for an hour, my heart a nervous drum against my ribs, until I found it. The street was in a decaying suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where the houses were old and tired, with peeling paint and overgrown lawns. The house that matched the coordinates was the worst on the block. It looked sunken and sad, the roof sagging and the windows dark and empty. It felt like a place where hope had died. I took a deep breath and walked up the cracked concrete path. I knocked on the door. For a long moment, there was no answer. I was about to turn away when I heard the sound of multiple locks being unbolted from the inside. The door creaked open just a few inches, held in place by a thick chain. A pair of terrified eyes peered out at me from the darkness within. "What do you want?" a woman's voice whispered. It was thin and hoarse, like she hadn't used it in a long time. "I found you through the forum," I said, my own voice trembling slightly. "I have one too. The binder." The eyes widened in recognition. The chain rattled and the door swung open. The woman who stood before me was a ghost. She was gaunt, her skin stretched tight over her cheekbones, and her hair was thin and gray. She wore a faded bathrobe, and in her hands she clutched a black leather binder identical to my own. She was a living, breathing, cautionary tale. "Come in," she whispered, ushering me inside and quickly relocking the door behind us. "My name is Evelyn." The inside of the house was even worse than the outside. It was cluttered and dark, with sheets draped over the furniture and a thick layer of dust coating everything. It smelled of stale air and fear. Evelyn led me to a small kitchen table. We sat in silence for a moment, two strangers bound by the same impossible secret. "It took my husband," she said finally, her voice cracking. "That's how I know it's real. I thought she meant he had died, a victim of some rule she had broken. But the truth was far worse. I broke a rule," she explained, her eyes distant, "a small one. I forgot to wind the grandfather clock in the hall. It was a new rule that had just appeared. The next day, he was just gone." "Gone?" I asked. "Like, he left you?" Evelyn shook her head, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. "No, gone, erased. I woke up, and he wasn't there. All of his clothes were gone, his photos, our marriage certificate. I called his work, and they'd never heard of him. I called his mother, and she asked who I was. It's like he was never born, but I remember him. I remember everything." Her story hit me like a physical blow. It was the coffee mug, but 1,000 times worse. The system hadn't just taken an object, it had taken a person. It had consumed a life. "This thing, this benefactor," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and rage. "It's a parasite. It doesn't want to kill you. That would be too simple. It wants to feed on you. It wants to eat your life, piece by piece. Your memories, your possessions, your connections to other people. It strips you down until there's nothing left but you and the rules." She looked at me, her eyes hollow pits of despair. "You need to run," she said, "but there's nowhere to go." Evelyn refilled our glasses with water, her hand shaking so much that some of it sloshed onto the dusty table. She didn't seem to notice. Her focus was entirely on the grim theory she had spent years developing in her self-imposed prison. "I've had a lot of time to think," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "At first, I thought it was a demon or some kind of curse. I thought it was punishing me. But that's not right. Punishment implies emotion, malice. This thing, it's not malicious. It's worse. It's indifferent." I leaned forward, hanging on her every word. This was the first time I had heard someone try to explain the why behind the rules. I don't think the benefactor is a person or a creature, she continued, staring at her own binder on the table as if it were a venomous snake. I think it's a system. Maybe it's an entity from another dimension, or a piece of ancient sentient code. I don't know. But what I do know is what it feeds on: order. It thrives on predictability, on closed loops. Her words started to click into place, forming a horrifying kind of sense. The locked doors, the single light, the precise replacement of broken items. They weren't random. They were designed to create a stable, unchanging, and perfectly controlled environment. The rules are its life support, she explained. They force your life into a pattern it can understand, a pattern it can feed on. Think about it. Our lives become a ritual. Every day is the same. We are predictable. We are orderly. So what happens when we break a rule? I asked, my voice hoarse. You introduce chaos, she said, a flicker of something that might have been scientific curiosity in her tired eyes. You create an unpredictable variable, a bug in the system, and the system has to fix it. It has to restore order. So it doesn't punish you, it performs maintenance. It finds the source of the chaos, the broken mug, the unwound clock, and it prunes it from reality. It deletes the variable to make the equation work again. The idea was chilling. It meant we weren't victims of a cruel master, but lab rats in a cold cosmic experiment run by a force that saw our lives, our memories, and our loved ones as nothing more than data, points to be deleted when they became messy. The horror was in its complete lack of emotion. It wasn't personal. We were just loose ends that needed to be tied up. Evelyn saw the understanding dawning on my face. She gave a small, bitter nod. Then she slid her binder across the table and tapped a page with a trembling finger. It was a new rule, one I didn't have. Rule number 8. It appeared last week, she said, her voice breaking completely. I leaned over to read the typewritten words. They were simple, direct, and monstrous in their implication. The rule said, you must dispose of any living creature cohabiting in your space. Evelyn looked towards the living room, where I could just make out the corner of a fluffy dog bed. His name is Buster, she whispered, tears now streaming down her face. He's all I have left. The rule, it wants me to get rid of my dog. I left Evelyn's house with my mind reeling and my stomach in knots. Her theory about the system, about the cold, unfeeling maintenance it performed, had chilled me to the bone. Her story about her dog, Buster, haunted me. The system wasn't just pruning objects. It was demanding acts of calculated cruelty. It was forcing its participants to sever their own emotional connections, to become as cold and orderly as the system itself. I drove home in a daze, the world outside my car window seeming thin and unreal. When I got back to my apartment building, another plain brown box was sitting on my doorstep. My heart sank. Another gift. I had no choice but to follow Rule 6. I picked up the box, which felt oddly light, and brought it inside. I set it on the kitchen table, the same spot where I had opened the locket. For a moment, I just stared at it, filled with a sense of profound dread. What new, cursed object was I being forced to bring into my life? With a deep sigh of resignation, I opened it. Inside, resting on a bed of yellow tissue paper, was a single, antique child's shoe. It was made of worn, cracked leather, with a row of tiny buttons up the side. It was incredibly old and heartbreakingly small. It looked like it belonged in a museum or a ghost story. I took it out of the box and placed it on the dresser next to the silver locket. The two objects sat there together, a small collection of unwanted, menacing artifacts. They felt like anchors, tying me to this strange reality. That night, my sleep was not restful. It was filled with nightmares. I dreamed I was in a vast, empty house, and I could hear the sound of a child crying. The sobs were desperate and filled with sorrow, echoing through the empty rooms. I wandered through the dream, calling out, trying to find the source of the sound, but the house was a maze, and the crying always seemed to be coming from the next room over. I never found the child. I just heard its grief all night long. The next day, the feeling of not being alone in my apartment became stronger than ever. The figures in my peripheral vision were changing. Before, they were just indistinct, tall shadows. Now, one of them was becoming clearer. It was always the same one. A tall, gaunt man in an old-fashioned dark suit. He was always just at the edge of my sight, standing in a doorway or reflected for a split second in a dark window. He never moved. He just stood there watching. My apartment no longer felt like my own space. It felt occupied. The gifts weren't just objects, they were invitations. I had brought the locket and the shoe into my home, and now it felt like their previous owners were here with me, silent, unseen roommates in my prison. The entity behind the rules, the system, it felt like it was getting closer, its presence seeping into the very walls of my home. I had been dreading it for weeks, ever since the locket and the shoe appeared. I knew the system wasn't done with me. It had taken a memory. It had given me cursed objects. It was only a matter of time before it demanded more. The moment came on a gray Thursday morning. I went through my ritual, my hands trembling as I opened the binder. I turned past the first 5 rules, past the 6th rule about gifts, and my eyes fell on the next page. It was no longer blank. A new line of typewritten text sat starkly in the center of the page. Rule number 7. My blood ran cold as I read the words. You must sever all contact with one member of your immediate family. The command was simple, brutal, and completely unambiguous. There was no room for interpretation. It meant Chloe. She was all I had left. My parents were gone, and my extended family was scattered and distant. Chloe was my only immediate family. She was my rock, my best friend, the only person in the world who truly knew me, even if she currently thought I was losing my mind. The binder, the system, this monstrous, parasitic entity wanted me to cut her out of my life, to erase her, just like I had erased the memory of the mug. Below the rule was another, smaller line of text. Compliance required within 1 week. A deadline. I had 7 days to willingly destroy the most important relationship in my life. I slammed the binder shut, a wave of nausea washing over me. This was different. The other rules were about habits, objects, perceptions. They were passive. This was active. This was a command to perform an act of profound emotional violence against myself and against her. This was a line I could not, would not cross. The thought of calling Chloe and telling her I could never speak to her again was unthinkable. The pain it would cause her, the confusion, the hurt, it was too much to bear. And what would happen if I did? Would she just forget me, the way she forgot the mug? Or would she live with the pain of her brother abandoning her for no reason? I didn't know which was worse. For the first time since I accepted the deal, I felt a flicker of true rebellion. The fear was still there, a cold, heavy weight in my gut, but underneath it was a spark of anger. This thing had taken my debt, yes, but it was trying to take my soul in exchange, and that was a price I was not willing to pay. I would not do it. I would not erase my sister. I had 1 week to decide what to do, but in my heart the decision was already made. I would defy it, no matter the cost. The week was a special kind of hell. Every waking moment was filled with a suffocating, paralyzing dread. I went to work like a zombie, stocking shelves and selling books, my mind a million miles away, replaying the words of Rule 7 over and over again. I would feel his presence behind me in the stacks. He was no longer just in my apartment, he was following me. The system was watching, waiting for me to comply. Each day that passed, the pressure mounted. I jumped every time my phone buzzed, terrified it was Chloe, and I wouldn't know what to say. I let all her calls go to voicemail. Each missed call felt like a small betrayal, a partial compliance with the rule that made me sick to my stomach. Was this what it wanted, for me to just ghost her, or did it require a formal, brutal severing? The binder offered no clarification. By the final day, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept in what felt like a week. I was living on coffee and fear. The deadline was midnight. The thought of simply doing nothing, of letting the clock run out, was terrifying. What would the consequence be? Based on Evelyn's theory, the system would prune, the source of the chaos. And the source of this chaos, this defiance, was my connection to Chloe. Would it erase her? Or would it erase me? The thought of her just vanishing from the world, of my defiance causing her non-existence, was more than I could handle. But the thought of being the one to cause her pain, to cut her off, was equally impossible. There was no good option. There was only defiance or submission. I sat on my couch, staring at the clock on the wall as the minutes ticked by. 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. The dread was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. And then I knew what I had to do. It was an act of rebellion born not of anger, but of love. If the system was going to punish me for my connection to my sister, then I was going to make that connection as strong and as real as I possibly could. I was not just going to break the rule, I was going to shatter it. With a trembling hand, I picked up my cell phone. I scrolled to her name, my thumb hovering over the call button. I took a deep, shaky breath and pressed it. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight with worry. Alex? Oh my God, I've been so worried. Are you okay? Chloe, I said, my voice cracking, the word a desperate plea, and then it all came pouring out. In a frantic, panicked, and probably incoherent torrent of words, I told her everything. Not the careful, hesitant explanation I had tried before, but the whole, ugly, terrifying truth. I told her about the binder, about every single rule. I told her about the power outage and the crooked photo. I told her about the erased mug and the gifts, the locket and the child's shoe. I told her about Evelyn and her theory of a parasitic system. And then I told her about Rule 7. I told her that I was supposed to cut her out of my life, and that I was on the phone with her right now, breaking that rule in the most flagrant way I could imagine. I'm so sorry, Chloe, I sobbed into the phone. I don't know what's going to happen. Please, you have to believe me. Maybe you should go somewhere, hide, I don't know. Just do something. She was silent on the other end, and for a terrifying moment I thought the line had gone dead. But then I heard her take a breath. Alex, she said, her voice shaking, just stay on the phone with me. Don't hang up. I had made my choice. I had committed my act of rebellion. Now all I could do was wait for the consequence. I stayed on the phone with Chloe for over an hour. I waited for the line to be cut off, for the power to go out, for the walls of my apartment to start bleeding. But nothing happened. The world outside my window remained stubbornly normal. Cars drove by, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The hum of the city was a steady, comforting presence. Gradually, a sliver of hope began to bloom in my chest. Maybe I had overestimated it. Maybe the system's power was limited. Maybe it could alter memories of small objects or scare me with shadows. But erasing a person? Maybe that was beyond its capabilities. Or maybe my frantic confession had created so much chaos that the system didn't know how to react. Are you still there? Chloe's voice came through the phone, pulling me from my thoughts. Yeah, I said, my own voice sounding stronger. Yeah, I'm here. Nothing's happening. Okay, she said, a note of relief in her tone. Okay, good. Alex, I think you need to come stay with me for a few days. We'll figure this out. I'll help you look for a doctor. She still thought I was crazy. But she wasn't hanging up on me. She wasn't abandoning me. She was trying to help in the only way she knew how. That was enough. Okay, I agreed. I'll come over tomorrow. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone. The dread had receded, replaced by a fragile sense of victory. I had faced down the monster and won. I had stood my ground, and the system had blinked. I had protected my sister. To be sure, to prove to myself that everything was truly okay, I decided to call her back one more time, just to hear her voice again, to confirm that reality was still intact. I navigated to my recent calls and tapped her name. The phone rang once, twice. Then a man's voice answered, gruff and annoyed. Yeah, what? I was confused. Oh, sorry, I stammered. I think I have the wrong number. I was trying to call Chloe. There was a pause on the other end. Then the man's voice, full of irritation, said, There's no Chloe here. You got the wrong number, pal. He hung up. My blood ran cold. My hands started to shake violently. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. I must have misdialed. I opened my contacts list, my thumb scrolling frantically. See. Where was she? My heart seized in my chest. Her name was gone. Chloe. It wasn't there. It was as if the contact had never existed. Panic seized me. I scrambled through my photos, my fingers swiping wildly across the screen. I found the vacation photos, the ones from the beach. There was the picture of me and her, the one that had been hanging on my wall. I stared at it, my vision blurring with tears. In the photo, I was standing on the beach, my arm wrapped around empty air. I was smiling, hugging a space where a person should have been. I was alone. I looked up from my phone, my eyes darting to the wall where the framed photo hung. It was still there. But inside the frame, it was just me, standing on the sand, alone, with a happy, foolish grin on my face. The system hadn't punished me. It hadn't erased me. It had performed its maintenance. It had identified the source of the chaos, my connection to my sister, and it had pruned her. It had pruned her from everything but my memory. Not N. The silence in the apartment was no longer just silence. It was an active, suffocating presence. It was the sound of an absence. Chloe was gone. Not dead, not moved away. Gone. Erased from the very fabric of existence, as if she had been a typo in the manuscript of the world. The consequence of my defiance was a horror I could never have imagined. The system hadn't just taken her away, it had taken her from everyone, from everything, except me. I was the sole archivist of my sister's life. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight that made it impossible to breathe. But it was compounded by a layer of pure, mind-shattering horror. I had done this. My act of rebellion, my desperate phone call, had been the trigger. I had pointed the system's pruning shears directly at her. The guilt was an acid, dissolving me from the inside out. My apartment, once a symbol of my new life, was now a museum of a person who no longer existed. Every corner held a ghost. The kitchen where she'd stood just a week ago, her face etched with worry. The couch where we'd sat and watched movies. The empty space on the wall where her picture used to hang. It was all still there but hollowed out, the meaning scooped out of it. The most terrifying part was the photos. I pulled out old family albums, my hands shaking. There were my parents smiling. But they were smiling at a single child, me. In photos where I knew with every fiber of my being that Chloe had been standing right next to me, there was now just an empty space. The world had neatly tucked itself in around her absence, leaving no seams, no scars. No one else felt the loss because, for them, there was nothing to lose. She had never been born. I tried to search for her online, a desperate, foolish act. Her social media pages were gone. The university alumni page no longer listed her name. The digital footprint of her entire life had been wiped clean. I was screaming in a soundproof room. My grief had no echo. There was no one to share it with, no one to comfort me, because no one else remembered the person I was mourning. The tall man in the suit was gone. The flickers in my peripheral vision had stopped. The landline remained silent. The system was satisfied. Order had been restored. My life was now a perfect, closed loop. I was completely and utterly alone, a ghost haunting a life that had been curated for me by an invisible monster. I was a prisoner in a cage built of my own grief and guilt, and the only person who had ever had a key was the one I had caused to disappear. N. The grief was a fire, and for days it consumed me. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the screaming silence of my apartment, staring at the empty spaces where Chloe used to be. But slowly, over the course of a week, the fire of that grief began to burn away the despair and fear, and what was left behind was something hard and cold and sharp. It was rage. A pure, undiluted rage at the injustice, the cruelty, the cold cosmic indifference of it all. This system, this entity, had made a fatal mistake. It had taken away the one thing I had left to lose. And in doing so, it had left me with nothing to fear. It couldn't threaten me with loneliness. I was already the loneliest person in existence. It couldn't threaten me with loss. I had already lost everything. I couldn't get Chloe back. I knew that. The system didn't give refunds. But I could get revenge. I could burn the whole rotten system to the ground. I remembered Evelyn's theory, the words she had spoken in her dusty, fear-choked house. It thrives on order. It feeds on predictability. The rules were its life support. Locked doors, a single light, replaced items. It was all designed to create a stable, orderly environment for it to feed on. I had broken one rule and it had deleted my sister. It had restored order by removing the source of the chaos. But what would happen if I didn't just break one rule? What if I broke all of them at once? What if I created so much chaos, so much unpredictable noise, that the system couldn't just prune one variable? What if I forced it to crash? It was a suicide mission. I knew that. If the consequence for one broken rule was that horrific, the consequence for breaking all of them at once would likely be my own erasure from existence. But the life I was living was not a life. It was an echo. A slow, agonizing torture in a silent cage. Being deleted felt like a mercy by comparison. At least it would be a choice. My choice. For the first time since I clicked that cursed ad, I felt a sense of power. I was no longer a rat in a maze, reacting to shocks and rewards. I was going to be the demolition crew. I was going to take a sledgehammer to the walls of my prison. I couldn't save my old life, and I couldn't get Chloe back, but I could make sure this parasitic system never fed on anyone ever again. I would become the biggest, most chaotic bug in the program, and I would take it all down with me. It wasn't about gathering weapons, it was about timing and precision. I had to create a perfect storm of chaos, a symphony of defiance. I waited, my rage simmering into a cold, focused calm. The sun set, and as darkness fell, I did not turn on the lamp in the corner. I let the shadows lengthen and pool in the room, a direct violation of rule number 2. The darkness felt different tonight. It was not menacing, it was an accomplice. The clock on the wall ticked past 10 p.m. I walked to my front door. Instead of checking the lock, I slid the chain off and turned the deadbolt, unlocking it. I left the door cracked open an inch. Then I went to the windows and unlatched both of them, pushing them open to the cool night air. Rule number 1, broken. Next, I went to my dresser. The silver locket and the antique child's shoe sat there, silent and menacing. They were anchors to the entity, a part of its order. I picked them up, walked to the kitchen, and placed them on the hard tile floor. I raised my foot and brought my heel down with all my strength. The tarnished silver of the locket crumpled and bent. I stomped again, and the tiny child's shoe flattened, its old leather cracking. Rule number 6, the acceptance of gifts, was now profaned by their destruction. I felt a change in the air, a drop in temperature. The feeling of being watched intensified, but I was no longer afraid. I welcomed it. I went into the bathroom and stood before the mirror. For the first time, I didn't look away from the edges. I stared directly into my own reflection and waited. In the space behind my shoulder, a shape began to coalesce. It was the tall man in the suit, wavering and indistinct like heat rising from pavement. I did not flinch. I did not ignore him. I looked right at him. "Do you see me?" I whispered, my voice a low growl. "I see you." Rule number 3, broken. I turned from the mirror and walked back into the living room. I took a deep breath. I screamed my mother's name into the empty apartment. Then I screamed Chloe's. I shouted her name over and over, a desperate, loving war cry against the silence that had swallowed her. I was filling the void with her memory, an act of pure, chaotic grief. Then I sat down next to the landline, the final piece of my symphony. I waited. The silence stretched. And then it rang. One shrill, piercing ring. Then a second. My hand hovered over the receiver. The rule was to never answer if it rang more than twice. On the third ring, just as it began, I snatched the phone from its cradle and pressed it to my ear. "I'm here," I said. On and the line was dead silent for a single heartbeat-skipping moment. Then the silence was shattered. A sound erupted from the earpiece, a noise so horrible it felt like it had physical weight. It was not a voice. It was a shriek of pure digital static, a blast of white noise that sounded like every computer in the world crashing at once. It was the sound of a system in catastrophic failure. The shriek didn't just come from the phone, it filled the entire apartment, seeming to vibrate from the very air itself. The floor beneath my feet began to tilt, like I was standing on the deck of a sinking ship. I looked up, and the walls of the room were wavering, glitching like a corrupted video file. The paint seemed to peel away, revealing a churning, black void underneath. The orderly reality of my apartment was coming apart at the seams. I dropped the phone and scrambled backwards, staring in horror at the spot where the man in the suit had been. He was no longer a man. The shape was still there, but it was expanding, unraveling. It was a tear in the fabric of the room, a vortex of pure non-being. It wasn't black, it was the absence of color, of light, of matter. It was a hole in the world, and it was growing, pulling everything toward it. The edges of the couch began to fray into nothingness. The books on the shelf dissolved into particles of dust and vanished. It wasn't just destroying things, it was unmaking them. I felt a strange, tingling sensation spread through my body, as if my own atoms were losing their connection to each other. The system wasn't attacking me, it was deleting me. My memories began to flicker and die like old film strips. My childhood home, my first day of school, my parents' faces, they were all dissolving into the static. My identity, my sense of self, my very consciousness was being unraveled, pulled into the shrieking vortex. This was it. The end. Deletion. As the last of my memories began to fade, as my own name started to feel foreign on my tongue, I clung to one single, defiant thought. It was the only thing I had left. It was the memory of my sister's laugh, a bright, beautiful sound from a summer afternoon long ago. I held on to it with all my might, a tiny spark of warmth against the encroaching, absolute cold. I closed my eyes as the static consumed me, and I thought of nothing but her laugh. Nan and I woke up with a choked gasp, my lungs burning as if I'd been held underwater. My cheek was pressed against something rough and grimy. I blinked, my vision swimming back into focus. I was sprawled on the floor of my old, debt-ridden apartment. The air was thick with the familiar smell of dust and despair. Sunlight streamed through a dirty window pane, illuminating a path of swirling dust motes. Taped to the inside of the front door, yellowed and curling at the edges, was the final eviction notice. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrambled to my feet, my body aching. I looked around the room. The cluttered counters, the stained couch, the pile of bills. It was all here. It was all back. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone. My hand closed around my old one, the one with the cracked screen. I turned it on, my fingers shaking. I pulled up my banking app. A massive, terrifyingly familiar negative balance stared back at me. It was all back. The debt, the poverty, the hopelessness. The deal was broken. I had crashed the system, and it had spit me back out into the life I had so desperately tried to escape. I had failed. A wave of crushing despair washed over me. I had gone through all that horror, lost my sister, only to end up right back where I started. I sank onto the lumpy couch, burying my face in my hands. But then my phone buzzed. A soft, single vibration against the wood of the coffee table. I picked it up, expecting a message from a creditor. But it wasn't. It was a text message. The name on the screen made my breath catch in my throat. Chloe. The text was simple. "Hey, you went dark for a couple of days. Everything okay?" Tears, hot and immediate, streamed down my face. She was real. She was back. I hadn't failed. In destroying the system, I had undone its single cruelest act. My chaotic rebellion had not just reset my life. It had reset hers. I was trapped again, yes. Drowning in debt, facing eviction, my future, a bleak, uncertain landscape. But I wasn't alone. I had escaped the gilded cage. As the momentary glorious relief began to fade, the crushing weight of my old life settled back onto my shoulders like a heavy cloak. I was free from the binder, but I was once again a prisoner of my circumstances. It was a thin, dry whisper of a sound. I froze, my eyes wide, every muscle in my body tensing. A shadow fell across the sliver of light under the door. Then a thin black object slid silently across the dusty floor and came to a stop in the middle of the room. It was a heavy, leather-bound binder.